10 years I labored in the cause of communism. I was a dedicated comrade. All my talents and efforts were zealously used to bring about the triumph of communism in America and throughout the world. To me, the end of capitalism would mark the beginning of an interminable period of plenty, peace, prosperity, and universal comradeship. All racial and class differences and conflicts would end forever after the liquidation of capitalists, their government, and their supporters. A world union of Soviet states under the hegemony of Russia would free and lead mankind to utopia. Being an idealist, I was sold this bill of goods by a Negro graduate of the Lenin Institute in Moscow. The color of one's skin is no bar to a young man or woman dreaming of making a better world. Like other Negroes, I experienced and saw many injustices and inequalities around me based upon color, not ability. I was told that the decadent capitalist system is responsible, that mass pressure could force concessions, but that just prolongs the life of capitalism. That I must unite and work with all those who more or less agree that capitalism must go. Little did I realize I was deeply enmeshed in the red conspiracy that just and seeming grievances are exploited to transform idealism into a cold, ruthless weapon against the capitalist system. That is the end toward which all the communist efforts among Negroes are directed. Indeed, I had entered the red conspiracy in the vain belief that it was the way to a new, better, and superior world system of society. 10 years later, thoroughly disillusioned, I abandoned communism. The experiences of those years in the outer darkness are like a horrible nightmare. I saw communism in all its naked cruelty, ruthlessness, and utter contempt of Christian attributes and passions. And, too, I saw the low value placed upon human life, the total lack of respect for the dignity of man, the betrayal of trust, the terror of the secret police, and the bloody hand of the assassin during and since those fateful years when I embraced communism. I was lured into the Red Movement by the way of the American Negro Labor Congress, one of the many front organizations set up by the communists to trap the naive, unwary, unsuspecting, and idealistic Negro. The use of such attractive and appealing fronts as a means of entrapment is a most important serpentine method of the Reds. That was Manning Johnson, and this is all minus one. I'm Bill. Please, if you enjoy this kind of content, like, share, and subscribe. Now, why am I bringing up Manning Johnson? Well, Manning Johnson was a black man who was a communist for some years and involved in communist activities. He wrote this book, Color, Communism, and Common Sense. You can get this online, and I will link it in the description. So everything I'm about to lay out now has to do with emotional arguments and propaganda pulling people into the communist movement. And the whole thing that you have to understand that's going on in our country right now, there are other institutions at play, but the people on the ground are basically two groups. One of those groups is Antifa. Now, they get sympathy by saying they're anti-fascist. However, they're completely totalitarian, and they will hurt anybody that comes across their path. They want destruction, and they want their communist utopia. The second group is Black Lives Matter. Now, if we take the statement as it is, Black Lives Matter, yes, of course, Black Lives matter. All people matter. And I understand the idea behind police brutality. And I'm not so unaware as to understand where the black community came from, but I also know the history of the black community, and that they were doing well for quite some time, and then things got worse for them, actually. And so this idea of police brutality, I am totally against police brutality, but this idea is a front to cover up the real organization of Black Lives Matter. And the people in the streets who are sympathetic, perhaps you listening out there, they are just being caught up into the idea that, oh no, these poor people can't get anything done because of this systemic racism or because of policing issues or whatever else. We can address that. There are deeper issues, I think, that need to be addressed as well. But the reality is that the Black Lives Matter movement is really about bringing in a communist utopia into the United States. And they get what Yuri Bezmenov would call the useful idiots out in front to support them, not knowing that they are being used as puppets for bigger players. So, what we are going to talk about here is, first off, the Black Lives Matter symbol. That is the fist, and what the fist always means. It is a communist, socialist fist. That's what that symbol represents. So from Wiki, the Black Panther Party, originally the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, was a revolutionary, socialist political organization founded by Marxist college student Bobby Seals and Huey Newton. The party was active in the United States from 1966 to 1982. They're still active. They were just down in Richmond not too long ago during the gun rights protest, with chapters in major cities and international chapters in the United Kingdom as early as the 1970s and in Algeria from 1969 to 1972. At its inception, the Black Panther Party's core practice was to open carry armed citizens patrols, cop watching, and monitor the behavior of police in the Oakland Police Department and challenge police brutality in the city. Now, I'm all for people wanting to open carry if they want, or conceal carry, or their right to do that within the United States system. In fact, I think it's a God-given right that you have a right to protect your own person. What I'm not for is overt acts of violence, at least not without self-defense. So let's look at their ideology here. This is just a list that Wiki has listed of their ideologies. They're anti-fascist. Well, I think most people are anti-fascist. Most people don't understand what fascism is, and I will be making probably another video later on about that. But to a communist, anyone who isn't communist is a fascist. You really need to understand this point. They are anti-imperialism. They are anti-racism, anti-Zionism, anti-capitalism, African-American socialism, African-American leftism, black nationalism, black pride, Maoism, gun rights, communism, Marxism, Leninism, revolutionary socialism, and intercommunalism. Now, about the only thing I can get behind here are gun rights. I'm okay with black pride. I'm against anti-racism. I don't want people to be racist. But that's about it. The rest of that's, I'm anti-fascist too, but like in what sense? Am I going to go beat someone over the head because they have fascist beliefs? No. I'm more or less a pacifist. I, in fact, left my former professions after coming to spiritual revelations that I could no longer use force. And even when I was in those professions, I was always very cautious with the force that I used because I don't believe in hurting people. Now, let's go to a brief history of the raised fist. The clenched fist, you've seen it before on television and in movies, on posters and textbooks, maybe even in person at a rally. As a gesture itself, it holds no meaning, which is absurd. Of course it holds a meaning. It's held a meaning for over 100 years, almost 200 years now. But throughout history, a variety of communities have used it as a symbol of resistance and unity. A simple yet demonstrative act of rebellion against institutional oppression. Now, there is a term out there that the left uses, they appropriated, called dog whistling. They accuse the right constantly of dog whistling about racial matters. This is untrue. They have their own coded words, though. Supposedly, only leftists can hear the dog whistles because I know no one on the right who believes in the concept. In fact, the concept is even from America. It came from Australia in a particular political situation, And I don't remember all the details, but maybe we'll talk about that another time. Now, it says here unity and institutional oppression, those are code words for communism. Not those particularly being communism, but when you know you're talking to a communist when they say things like that, even if they don't know they're a communist. Now here, he talks about this painting. This is from the Revolution of 1848 in France. This is where the king was usurped, and it says Bloody June Days. Now, we're going to go to Britannica very quickly, and we're going to look at in the Second Republic. Now, this is after the French Revolution. This is after Napoleon, and this is during the new government, and instituted numerous radical reforms. But the new assembly, composed mainly of moderate and conservative candidates, was determined to cut costs and end risky experiments such as public works programs to provide for unemployment. Now, I talked about Bastiat a few days ago. These are some of the concepts that Bastiat was talking about. I talked about de Tocqueville. He also had an essay against socialism. These men were in this government of this time. The public works programs were things that we would see now, like pensions or whatever, but they were a soft form of socialism of sorts. So what happened is they cut these programs and people went to the streets. We saw a similar thing a few years ago in Greece. And the problem is that the governments cannot continue these programs because it bankrupts them and it bankrupts the people, and the people don't produce anything. It says thousands of Parisian workers suddenly cut off from the state payroll were joined by radicalized sympathizers and took to the streets in spontaneous protest. So the assembly gave a general, some French name I'm not going to try to pronounce, authority to suppress the uprising. He brought up artillery against the protesters' brigades. At least 1,500 rebels were killed. Another 20,000 arrested and many exiled to Algeria. So, what we need to understand is that if you go out and protest, there's a potential for military or police violence. Now, in those days, they didn't really have police. The military was the police. One of the things that made America different when we started implementing police was that they were not militarized, and that is a problem today. So again, I'm sympathetic to this idea. I've been this same spot for 15 years now. I don't like it. I don't like police militarization. The founding fathers never wanted a standing army or military in the U.S. However, it does not excuse people for going into the streets and rioting, looting, burning, murdering. We don't know what else is going on. There might be rapes. There might be, who knows what. The mob is no better. There must be balance, people. Balance. So here, we're going to talk about the Spanish Civil War, where Republican militias and international brigades were used to raise fists as a symbol of anti-fascism. Again, this is always on the left. When they're talking about the militia people, the resistance, they were actually communist. For anyone who doesn't know, Spain was a fascist country. They were going through a civil war. Was it going to be communist or was it going to be fascist? Well, they're basically two sides of the same coin. And Franco won out, and they had a fascist regime until the 70s. Now, these people who were the resistors, the resistance, they were communists. Many people may not know, but George Orwell, the famous George Orwell of 1984, actually fought in the Spanish Revolution because he was sympathetic. He had to get out of Spain, and because of the encroaching communism, he had to leave. He was actually shot in the neck during the war. But he was sympathetic. He was a socialist of sorts. One of the reasons why he wrote 1984 is because he could see the and Animal Farm as well. He could see the totalitarianism rise within communist Russia, and he wanted to throw these ideas out there. Now, the problem is that the socialists who don't want full-on communism don't understand that will eventually come. And so if we roll down a little bit further, we're going to talk about the Black Power salute at the 1968 Olympics. Now, that's right here. This was in Mexico City during 1968. Two African-American athletes, Tommy Smith and John Carlos, raised a black glove fist during the national anthem. So that's their right to do. Now, here it says in his autobiography, Silent Gesture, Smith stated that the gesture was not a Black Power statute, or salute, but a human rights salute. Now, again, this is code. So first off, if it's Black Power, that's supremacist movement. And I'm not really, I'm fine with the idea. But when we start talking about these kind of far left ideas, these collectivist ideas, you're always getting into supremacy. That's why fascism, being totalitarian, is a supremacist movement. Liberty is not. It's a movement of freedom. It's a movement of allowing people to be individuals. So when they say human rights, though, they're also not talking about what we talk about when it comes to constitutional rights, civil rights. Human rights is more communist code. This comes from the UN, and they talk about the right to housing. Well, I can tell you right now, you don't have a right to a house. And there's a reason for that, because that's someone else's property. And you either have to take it with the force of a gun, or have them build it for you with the force of a gun, or have the government do that for you. So that is immoral. It's the same with the right to food. Do you have a right to food? No. Now, you don't have a right to be held away from food, but you don't have a right for me to have to cook for you. That is slavery on your part toward me. You become the master and I become the slave. Remember, we talked about this the other day, the master-slave mentality from Nietzsche. Or morality, that is. When you say people have a right to healthcare, what are you saying? Well, first off, we have have had a great healthcare system in the United States, but it gets worse and worse as the government gets more and more involved and it socializes more and more. That's another episode I can do at another time. However, if you are out in the woods and you hurt yourself, who is going to treat you? It's the same with a house. I can go build a shelter out in the woods. I know how to get food and survive. So my thing here is that these are all what's called positive rights. And positive rights must be given to you by force. Negative rights, such as the right to basically live in peace, to be able to live amongst my neighbors, to go about my way, to have myself as my own personal property, be alive and unhurt, to pursue whatever I want as long as it's not hurting other people, to gain property for myself as long as I'm not doing that by force, by taking it from other people. Those are negative rights. Negative rights. Not the same thing as communistic positive rights. So this is a very important thing to understand. Now, this is the Black Lives Matter symbol, that fist. This same symbol can be seen here on this communist flag. And there's a reason for this. Black Lives Matter, of course they do. But that is not what this movement's about. It's about introducing communism by playing to your emotions. Your emotions, your sympathy for people, and the propaganda that they put out to destroy the society so they can rebuild it and be in charge and be the supremacists themselves. See, what they do, because they're mostly persona, is they don't have their shadow developed. They don't realize their evil intentions. Some of them do. But most of the people who are just angry and mad and just emoting and going about this violence, they don't know. So they project this stuff onto you. And they think that might makes right. And of course, might does not make right. Two wrongs do not make a right. This is just basic stuff, right? We teach our kids this. Oh, here's Lenin with the fist. Here's Che. Here's old Oswald, who was living in Russia for quite a while before he returned to maybe do the Kennedy assassination. I believe this is Lenin again, or that could be Trotsky. I'm not sure. It's not a great picture. Here's Lenin, and so forth. So, I do not need to go any further than that as far as details go, because I'm going to play to you this little video from the Heritage Foundation. And it's only about 3 minutes long, and I'll let it speak for itself.
Many see the slogan Black Lives Matter, or BLM, as a noble plea for equal treatment under the law. It's a cry to secure the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for everyone. But what does the Black Lives Matter organization actually stand for? To find out, look no further than their leaders, Alicia Garza, Opal Tometi, and Patrisse Cullors. Here's Colors in a revealing 2015 interview.
I actually do have an ideological frame. Myself and Alicia in particular are trained organizers. We are trained Marxists.
Visit the Black Lives Matter website and read the list of demands to get a sense of how deep a transformation they seek. One of those demands proclaims, quote, "We disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family structure requirement by supporting each other as extended families and villages that collectively care for one another. We can't be certain, but it's hard to believe this radical agenda is what most signed up for when they made that hashtag Black Lives Matter social media post, or that every employee, customer, or shareholder at Nike endorses a disruption of the family." Garza first coined the phrase in 2013, the day George Zimmerman was acquitted of murdering Trayvon Martin. Her friend Colors added the hashtag and joined the words so it could travel through social media. Tometi created the digital platform blacklivesmatter.com. According to Robert Stilson of the Capital Research Center, the group became a self-styled global network in 2014 and a fiscally sponsored project of a separate progressive nonprofit in 2016. This evolution has helped embolden an agenda vastly more ambitious than a national defunding of police. The goals of the Black Lives Matter organization go far beyond what most people think. They're hiding in plain sight, there for the world to see. If only we read beyond the slogans and the summaries of the movement they helped to create. It's a distinction with a profound difference. Their radical Marxist agenda is bent on supplanting the basic building blocks of society, the family, replacing it with the state, and destroying the economic system that has lifted more people from poverty than any other. Theirs is a blueprint for misery, not justice. It must be rejected.
Now, there he talks about how they want to destroy the family and capitalism, which he states, not specifically, but states has risen everyone out of poverty, and it absolutely has. Now, when I say capitalism, I don't mean from the Marxist framework. That's the thing. They always like to do the framing. No, I'm talking about free markets, which we don't completely have in the United States, but we do have a largely free market. And one of the things that the free market has done since the 1970s has pulled something like 80 or 90% of all people around the globe out of abject poverty. If we go to a communist system, there will just be complete poverty except for the party members. And this brings me to this crazy article from the Smithsonian. You may have seen this going around here recently. I've been to the African American History and Culture Museum. It's a really cool place, actually. But this is nonsense. This is government-funded, people. This is within our institutions. Here is a... to even discuss this is ridiculous to me. Here is an infographic talking about white culture and what it is. Individualism, that is not to be collectivist. Self-reliance, that is to be, not reliant on the state or the government. Independent and autonomy, highly valued and rewarded. So, most of the black people I know want to be very independent and autonomous. I just don't understand this. The nuclear family, husband and breadwinner. Wife is the homemaker and subordinate. Well, look, this is just traditionalism. And a lot of families can't do this because they have to work because of globalism and the way things work, which again, we'll get into. But here's the thing. Traditional cultures and societies still do this. You'll see this in a lot of Asian cultures. You'll see this in South American cultures. You'll see this amongst Indian Hindus, and you'll see this amongst Middle Eastern Muslims. You will see this same structure. So they use those people, the minorities, and they tell them whatever nonsense that they tell them, manipulate their emotions, that this is whiteness. This isn't whiteness. This came about throughout all of history simultaneously from different people at different times. It is part of human nature. It is part of our structure because we are biological beings. What they want to do is something like Plato's Republic and replace the family with the state. They want to replace your identity with the state. Remember, if you look back to one of the earlier videos I did, is we, which was written by a Russian man who was a Communist Party member that had to be exiled, and we was about not having the identity in the state running everything. Being objective, a rational, linear thinker. That's all whiteness. Based on European immigration. Well, most of America was. Hard work's the key to success. So what are they saying that people who aren't white are lazy? I don't understand this. This is overt supremacy, not just of white people per se, but of anyone who isn't white who believes in these things, because then they say, well, you're acting white. That's absurd. There is no way to act based on the melanin in your skin. There are good cultures and there are bad cultures. And the European culture, the European ethnic groups have not been perfect throughout time, but neither has any other culture. Show me historically where the utopia was. I mean, what do we got? We got to go back to Atlantis until they the legend of Atlantis, where they were finally destroyed because they became corrupt. Let's see. Following rigid time schedules, time viewed as a commodity. Tim Pool talked about this the other day, and how some lefty talked about, he said, oh, I have to catch the schedule for a flight or whatever. The guy's like, that's colonial thinking. He's like, what are you talking about? Are you saying that my culture, Korean, they didn't have time, they didn't have clocks? If you go to Japan, they are very timely people. Like, same with Koreans. This is not a white thing. Based on European culture, steak and potatoes. Oh, man, it's just like bland is best. Why? Because some ethnic food is spicy. You know why they use spice? It was to preserve food. To preserve food, and it gave food taste. And that's why the spice routes were established. It's also why we started traveling the world to find better spice routes. People like food that tastes good. I really like Mexican food. I like Mediterranean food a lot as well. I like Asian food a lot. And some of the Asian food I like, especially like Thai food, is very spicy. Why is it whiteness to though like steak and potatoes? It's silly. So we got Christian religion based on white history and male leadership, English common law, etc., etc. We'll come back to this because here, our next document is a document submitted to Congress, as you can see, in 1963. And this is from The Naked Communists by Cleon, what's his last name? Skousen? I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. And I'm more than certain he was a FBI investigator. And he was looking into communist subversion. Now, the first few here are only applicable to the Cold War. But there are things here. This is all what the communists want. Because they wanted to drain the United States of its wealth. So an extension of long-term loans to Russia, Russian satellites. Let's see. Provide American aid to all nations, regardless of communist denomination. We pretty much do that now, but back then that would have been nice for them. And because of the Cold War, we were trying to keep them from being able to grow. Recognition of Red China, admission to China to the UN. Well, that's happened since. This one's about Germany, so that no longer applies. Prolong the conference to ban atomic testing. And that was so the Soviets could make secret weapons of their own. Allow Soviet satellites independent representation in the UN. Well, that did eventually happen as they became independent. And they weren't really before that. Promote the UN as the only hope for mankind. If its charter is rewritten, demand that it be set up as a one-world government with its own independent armed force. Some communist leaders believe that the world can be taken over as easily by the UN or by Moscow. Sometimes the two centers compete with each other. Now, I've mentioned this before in other videos. The world organizations, such as the WHO, such as the UN, such as the World Bank, they all want some form of communism or socialism, and they all are pushing for global government. Now, I don't like this idea for many reasons. One, I don't know how some bureaucrat thousands and thousands of miles away has any clue how my life should be dictated. Another is that there is utter corruption with the UN. You can investigate it rather easily. There's all kinds of corruption with the UN. Let's see, number 12, resist any attempt to outlaw the Communist Party. Now, you have your right to free speech. That's fine. And I don't know about outlawing the Communist Party. However, they would outlaw, I don't know, a classical liberal party, if I had one. They don't like that. They don't like freedom. They want you to be part of the collective because they're tribalistic and they want to return to the time when man was primitive. And I mean that as far as hunter-gatherer societies, before agrarian societies, or very primitive agrarian societies. And it's an insanity thing because they think that provides a better quality of life. And it does not necessarily. And they don't realize that those people actually had very little, had to work very hard. And when certain societies like the Israeli kibbutz formed and they were socialist and they eventually gained wealth, they left. Why did they leave? Well, because they didn't need to rely on each other as much anymore. They could be more independent. And being independent is a good thing, unless you like being a slave. Do away with all loyalty oaths. Continue to give Russia access to the U.S. Patent Office. Now, this could be applied to China now, except for they just steal our intellectual property rights. They also have bought up a lot of land and areas in Africa to gain resources. Of course, manufacturing has been almost completely localized in China, which is insanity to the point when COVID came out, we couldn't even support ourselves necessarily without their help, and they were the ones who were responsible for it. And then they buy up land and banks and things over here as well. So we really need to rethink how we're doing things, America, unless you want this red wave to come. Capture one or both political parties in the United States. Well, they did that. And it was easy for them to do that because there were already plenty of communists within the Democratic Party back in the early progressive era. If they weren't communists, they were fascists because, again, two sides of the same coin, people. It's just a little tweak in how things are operated and certain beliefs. And again, we will cover that. Use technical decisions of the court to weaken Americans' institutions by claiming their activities violate civil rights. What do you think all these civil rights unions have been doing over the years and all these liberal judges and courts have done over the years? Get control of schools. Use them as a transmission belt for socialism and current communist propaganda. Soften the curriculum. Get control of teachers' associations. Put the party line in the textbooks. All of that. Get control of schools. They've done. They've been doing it. They've been working at it for 100 years. Literally. It's documented. I'll do an episode on that sometime. Use the transmission belt of socialism and current communist propaganda. Soften the curriculum, meaning dumb down the education. And of course, teachers love to teach socialism. Gain control of all student newspapers. Use student riots to foment public protest against programs and organizations which are under communist attack. We're seeing this sort of now. But then we saw it at Kent State. We saw it a lot with the hippie movements. Things were happening. Now, not everyone at Kent State was rioting, but there were certainly riots. So that happened just a few years after this was submitted. Infiltrate the press. Get control of book reviewing assignments, editorial writing, policy-making positions. Well, they've done that. They infiltrated the press. They infiltrated social media. I mean, I may very well get the hammer for this video. Gain control of key positions in radio, TV, and motion pictures. Done all that. They've been doing that forever. When we talk about McCarthyism, we're always told a lie because at the time Hollywood was making pro-communist films. And McCarthy was going after people in the government. He wasn't going after Hollywood. This is a complete fiction made up. Continue discrediting American culture by degrading all forms of artistic expression. An American communist cell was told to eliminate all good sculpture from parks and buildings, substitute shapeless, awkward, and meaningless forms. Postmodern art, people. the ugly, nasty, stupid stuff that we look at all the time. You know, there are all kinds of people that talk about these things, but you don't listen. You don't pay attention. You go through your life just, you know, with your cake and circuses. And the problem with that is, and not speaking up, is that you can remain silent and hope they don't come for you, but they very well will. And if you have children, especially, or you will have children, or your grandchildren, they will be affected. And they will be put into poverty, and they will be put into chains, and they will not have the liberty that we have now. Now, I would like the liberty that we had before the turn of the last century. But this has been growing in the United States for a very, very long time and throughout the West because the communists are organized. In China, they have 50-year and 100-year plans. In the United States, we just go about things willy-nilly, at least publicly. And behind the scenes, these people are working and organizing, much like the video with those ladies who said that they're community organizers. That's what that is, generally speaking. Control art critics and directors of art museums. Our plan is to promote ugliness, repulsiveness, and meaningless art. Now, as Yuri Bezmenov was saying, this is to demoralize the people. Eliminate all laws governing obscenities and call them censorship and violation of free speech and press. Break down cultural standards of morality by promoting pornography and obscenity in books, magazines, motion pictures, radio, and TV. Present homosexuality, degeneracy, and promiscuity as normal, natural, healthy. Now, I'm not going to shun anybody for, being promiscuous at one time or another. I once was in my life. Like, we grow up and change. But the promotion of this comes from Marxism, guys. This comes from feminism. They're just used. These other things are just used. This comes from postmodernism. And the reason why they do this is because it dehumanizes you. It devalues you. I can tell you there is no gratification in an endless string of revolving partners. It is completely demoralizing and dehumanizing. And I'm so glad that I could break that cycle and get away from that and now be married to a very lovely person. You don't know what this does to your soul. And this is also the destruction of natural biological processes where human beings have always essentially pair bonded. It also is destructive because when societies have too many promiscuous females, only the top males, the most top earners or alpha males, there are those kind of sneaker males that get in there too, but only those get all the women, and the rest of them are then disenfranchised, and that makes men angry. The reason why it makes them angry is because they don't feel like they get to have any part of society or to propagate their lineage. And it demoralizes women because it doesn't teach them the sanctity of their body. 27. Infiltrate the churches and reveal religion with social religion. This has been happening. It's happening today in the churches. How dare you preachers? You don't know anything about the Bible if you are promoting this kind of stuff. You don't. And God will judge you. Discredit the Bible and emphasize the need for intellectual maturity, which does not need a religious crutch. A lot of this, too, is because the communist needs the religion to be the state. The state has to be the religion. That way, there can be no individualism. One of the strongest forces throughout medieval Europe was the church, the Roman Catholic Church. Why was it so powerful? Because it wasn't the church, it was a political entity. Eliminate prayer and praise of religious expression in school on the grounds that violates principles of separation of church and state. Well, that's obviously been happening. And it's silly because that was never what separation of church and state was about. The First Amendment says Congress shall pass no law, essentially mandating a religion upon the people. And the reason why is because before the states did have laws on that. And if you went to a certain church in a certain state that wasn't the state-approved church, you would be beaten. You would be flogged. But you don't know this because you don't know your history because Marxists have taken it over. Discredit the founding fathers. Well, let's hold on. Right before that. Discredit the American Constitution by calling it inadequate, old-fashioned, out of step with modern needs, a hindrance to cooperation between nations and a worldwide basis. Yeah, that is what they would say, and they're wrong. It's one of the greatest documents for government ever written because it maximizes human liberty, and we trash it all the time. We just ignore it. Discredit the American founding fathers, present them as selfish aristocrats who had no concern for the common man. Right. They were all slave owners, they all this and that, despite the fact that they tried to do as much as they could to get rid of slavery. We'll go through that history lesson another time, perhaps. Belittle all forms of American culture and discourage the teaching of American history on the grounds that it was only a minor part of the big picture. Give more emphasis on Russian history since the communists took over. Now, this doesn't happen, and the reason why it doesn't happen is because communism failed, and they actually, in Eastern Europe, they study the failures of communism and the tragedies and the horrors. They study the 200 million people that were murdered. Many of them starved to death because of social engineering, social planning. Support any socialist movement and give centralized control over any part of the cultural education, social agenda, welfare programs, mental health clinics, etc. So that would be all the intersectionalism. That's what that's about, guys. That's all code. Eliminate all laws or procedures which interfere with the operation of communist apparatus. Eliminate the House Committee upon un-American activities. So that was essentially the McCarthyism. Discredit and eventually dismantle the FBI. Well, the FBI is discredited itself, so it's been infiltrated by these far left progressive types, and that's evident by what has been going on with our current president. Infiltrate and gain control of more unions. Infiltrate and gain control of big business. Well, that's certainly happened. You think you're a radical because you're going out there supporting Black Lives Matter and riots and all this stuff? What has every single corporation done? They've just supported. And they want the centralized government to have more power because it will allow them to basically do what's called rent seeking, and that is make laws so that other people cannot then come in and compete with them. They are the only businesses. Look at what happened here with COVID. I believe I saw a thing the other day where something like 50% of small businesses are gone, wiped out, 50%. A lot more big businesses have gone under as well. And what does that do? Well, that just transfers wealth into the hands of a smaller and smaller portion. And what does that do? Well, that gives them more power and influence amongst you in your mind. Transfers some of the power of arrest from the police to social agencies. Isn't this what we're talking about now? Defund the police. Let's have social workers come in so the social workers can get beat and raped and possibly murdered and burglarized. I mean, come on. Treat all behavioral problems as psychiatric disorders, which no one but psychiatrists can understand or treat. Yeah. In part, this is why the DMS is so politicized. Dominate the psychiatric profession and use mental health laws as a means of gaining coercive control over those who oppose communist goals. So that's the stuff where, if you were a mental health patient, now you can't own guns anymore. That's what they're talking about. Discredit the family as an institution. Encourage promiscuity and easy divorce. So we already kind of talked about that, but this goes back to Plato's Republic. It goes back to any dystopian that talked about this stuff in the early 20th century. And essentially, you need the family to be destroyed because the family is the original socialized network. And as you get older and more independent, any good father and mother is going to raise their children to be such a person. And as you get more independent, you go into the world and you realize, well, no, that you people aren't necessarily my family. What they want to do is they want to have your neighbor be like your family and this and that. And, like anyone, I have issues like with family members from time to time, just like I would with a neighbor from time to time. And you need to work that kind of stuff out. But the point is that by deconstructing the family, they can then get control of, and they can say, well, no, don't rely on this person that is your heritage. Rely on us, the state. The state, we have everything under control. We have your best interest in mind. And I know a lot of people believe this naively, but the state never does. It's the only thing that the state does is create totalitarianism every single time throughout history. Emphasize the need to raise children away from the negative influences of the parents. Again, Plato's Republic. Attribute prejudice, mental blocks, and retarding of children to suppressive influence of parents. So you hear now, everyone's racist, and they're all racist because they're parents. I act this way because my parents. I act this way or that way because of my parents. Well, it's probably more because you have a bad relationship with your parents, and there are multiple reasons. I'm not saying there aren't bad parents, but it is better to reconcile with them as much as possible and to heal your own soul. And then, understand yourself. Parenting is not an easy thing to do, but if you're an open person with your children and you teach them good moral values, I promise you, in part, their temperament goes along with how they act and the dynamics. It's like any human relationship. But if we had better, stronger parents, we'd have a better, stronger society. And that's why they need to destroy this, so that then they can come in and be your mommy and your daddy. Create the impression that violence and insurrection are legitimate aspects of the American tradition, that students and special interest groups should raise up and use united force to solve economic, political, or social problems. What is this, right? What we're seeing right now. What we see right now. The people that defend themselves legitimately in the streets today are demonized and arrested, and the people that are rioting, looting, creating fires, murdering other people in the streets, they're fine. And then insurrection, you got to understand this. I had some idiot mention something on social media about the protests in Michigan with these people with their firearms being terrorists. Well, sorry, idiot. No, they weren't. They were protesting just like Black Panthers did. They were protesting with their firearms, and they were doing that for their own personal security. People were calling them terrorists in the news. They were not. They worked with the police. They worked with the government. I'll tell you another thing that happened in that instance. There was nothing violent. That's what happened. Nothing violent. There was a movement or a protest down in Richmond the other week. I believe I talked about this before, where a group of maybe Black Lives Matter, but it might have been Black Guns Matter, and I still haven't looked into that, and just regular, like what they call themselves, 3%ers, were there taking pictures together, and they were peaceful, and that's amazing. That's not an insurrection, people. The Constitution of the United States was started because of Shays' Rebellion. That was an insurrection. There was looting and rioting. And the federal government at the time, under the Articles of Confederation, had no authority to break that up. And the people were sympathetic who were locals. So they decided that for the protection of everybody and in order for the country, the union of countries, because that's what states are, is their own countries, but the unions of countries to be safe, the best thing they could do is create a slightly stronger centralized government in order to maintain the peace. 43, overthrow all colonial governments before native populations are ready for self-government. Internalize or internationalize the Panama Canal. That's again old. Repeal the colony reservation so the United States cannot prevent the World Court from seizing jurisdiction over domestic problems. Give the World Court jurisdiction over nations and individuals alike. So you see, again, this is about globalism. This is about global communism. This movement goes way back. It goes back to the 1880s, before Marx even. Marx was just the guy to really put it down. And who was Marx? He was the bourgeoisie. He was spoiled. He was a guy that basically never worked a day in his life and liked to complain about how the poor people had it bad. But it's not the poor people that had it bad. It's the same thing that Orwell discovered. It's that those that weren't as rich as others despise the rich, and they really don't care that much about the poor because it's about power. So, with that little journey, I hope you understand maybe something deeper about this movement. By all means, let us support the movement to demilitarize the police force. Let's not defund them, though. Let's give them better training. And let's not just blindly follow Black Lives Matter like we would blindly follow Antifa. Let's not praise people who are willing to do violence in the street to any random person because it is their will. Let's not do that, people. And I also want to ask you, if you understand these things, stand up and speak up, because they will come for you. They will. They'll come for your children. You're not immune. And if you're one of the fools who is following along in this movement, I guarantee you, those people who are organizing it and understand what they're doing, they will take you out as soon as possible, as soon as you get wind. So please read Manning Johnson's book. Look at the stuff that I put out here. Think for yourself. Don't just let me tell you what's up. And this has been All Minus One. I'm Bill. Please like, share, and subscribe, and be well.